was a very interesting time. I often went to marches and protests with my parents as a very little girl, 3 and 4 years old. And even at that young of an age, you knew that something was happening. My parents were leaders in the civil rights movement in the state of Michigan. And what the climate was, it was dangerous. There were times when my father would be in his office, in the civil rights office in Detroit, Michigan. And we lived, maybe about 25 minutes away from his office. And there were times when he couldn't get home because there were riots and protests and tanks in the street. And I remember it being very stressful for my parents, but it was definitely a time where Black people in the US were demanding equality, demanding to have the same rights as other people in the country. And we were on the front lines of that. Now, I wouldn't say that at the time that I was born, it wasn't like what you would see images of, say, Martin Luther King on the streets of Selma. By that time, as I said, my dad was working as a civil rights leader in establishing offices in the state of Michigan. But then again, as a little girl, I can't be so sure that it wasn't somewhat dangerous. Definitely knew that my parents were going through a lot of racism and discrimination. My mother was an amazing woman who worked in city government, and she had to create programs for women and minorities that would enable them to have access to various resources. And she had to do that because we didn't have access. So it was, even as a little girl, you could really tell that there was something going on that was important, and that it was going to impact my life for the greater good. And then as I got older, the more I matured, the more I understood, the more I could see what was going on. It really impacted how I see life as a whole.
I can see now that as you were born, in fact, it was already influencing, the climate was already influencing you, leading to you, a young girl of 6 years, decided to change her name to reflect her origin, her identity. Because when you make mention of Yoruba, of course, that goes down to that we can trace it, no? But if you just remain like Black America, Black British, okay, that is still a strong identity, but we need to go beyond that to see where you are coming from, because that is also what the Europeans do, no? That they know that they are Americans, yes, but they still know that they are either coming from Germany, they are coming from France, they are coming from Italy, they are coming from Ireland, and they make sure that their story is not cut. They are connecting themselves in a way that their children, their generation, know about their history. So I think this is something to be proud of that you did at 6 years old. So I'm trying to understand now, if you were to put it in 3 or 4 items that you were really demanding, okay, let's say the people were demanding at the time, that is 40 years ago?
Yes.
Okay, 40 years ago. What were these things that they were actually demanding from the system in the civil rights movement?
If people listen to some of the final speeches by Martin Luther King, they were about economic empowerment. And I think that when he started to talk about economic empowerment and economic equality, that's when things got very dangerous for him. So the areas that Black people wanted to have equal rights to was definitely economic empowerment or economic freedom, the ability to live anywhere they wanted to. And that was an issue because there were certain areas where Black people could not live. There was definitely the disguise of, well, you can live anywhere you want to. But once you moved into those neighborhoods, many times you were threatened. Your houses were marred with paint, telling you to, with the N word and telling them to go home. So there was the ability to have access to health care. Even there were separate, many times there were separate hospitals, and then when those hospitals began to integrate, there was definitely a disparity on the type of care that Blacks would get versus what whites would get. So there's housing, economics, healthcare, and pretty much any type of resource. To pick a fourth one would probably be education. Both my parents were educators, and so my parents actually were not able to get jobs as educators, even though they had degrees in education, because, and this is the words that they actually used when my father and mother were interviewing for jobs. We'll go ahead and hire you because you speak the King's English. But if they hadn't spoken clearly or more in being able to pronounce and enunciate everything clearly as you hear me doing right now, because that basically got passed down, they wouldn't have gotten hired. So it was education, finance, and economics, housing, resources, and education. In all of those areas, Black people were denied, and those were the things that we were fighting for at that time.
Now, America want to pride itself as the greatest country in the world. And this also I want to believe in terms of human rights. Otherwise, there is no reason why America should be in different part of the world trying to promote democracy, equality, and the freedom of the people. But how come you were fighting for freedom? Does it mean that America doesn't even have these tenets that it was promoting in the world?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think that people see America as this, big, as the best country of the world because it's such a huge economic power, and because it has this platform or foundation of democracy. But embedded in its history and in its culture, in its climate, is racism against Black people. Now, I have a diverse array of friends from all different cultures. So I don't want to say or give the depiction that all white people in the US are racist. Okay, I don't want to say that. But what I will say is that the foundation of this country is built on racism and slavery. And so what we're seeing right now, Obehi, is an unraveling or a re-education of white people when it comes to Black people, period. Black people in America, Black people all around the world. So I think a lot of how that has evolved is because of the last election that we had. And you could see so much that was underneath the surface begin to bubble up. But what has happened is there are now so many white Americans who are saying, you know what, it's not up to Black people to educate me on how to not be racist. As a white individual, I must, they're saying, become educated myself. How am I thinking racist thoughts? Because this is embedded in the foundation of the fabric of America. So how do I now, as a white individual, they're saying to themselves, become a part of the solution as a part of the problem? And they are understanding that has to start with them, not Black people educating them on how not to do it. They have to be able to educate themselves and each other on their own embedded thoughts, biases, and racist thoughts that they really didn't even know that they had consciously.